The crucifixion of Jesus is central to Christianity. Paul wrote to the Corinthian believers that Christ crucified is the very power of God and the wisdom of God. It is regarded as the pinnacle of Jesus' obedience to divine will and the sole means of reconciliation between God and humankind. Simply put, there is no Christianity without the crucifixion. From the earliest days of the Jesus movement, evangelists and apologists claimed that the crucifixion was predicted in the Hebrew Scriptures. The Gospels even have Jesus continually making this claim. See, for example, Luke 24, 26-27, quote, Jesus said, "Was it not necessary for the Messiah to suffer these things and to enter into his glory?" And beginning with Moses and with all the prophets, Jesus explained to them the things concerning himself in the Scriptures. In this part of my continuing series on Messianic prophecies, we'll look at 4 examples of purported Messianic prophecies about the crucifixion. Once again, this will reveal that the prophetic portrait Christians present heavily relies on misquotations, mistranslations, and misapplications of passages in the Hebrew Scriptures. By the way, how many Messianic prophecies are there in the Old Testament?
There's about 300 prophecies of a coming Messiah, a coming Savior of the world.
There are about 191 ancient predictions in the Old Testament of the Bible that point forward toward the Messiah, who would be the Savior of Israel in the world.
All told, there are more than 300 statements in the Old Testament that foretell details about the birth, life, death, and resurrection of the Messiah.
It's not as if they've had 2,000 years to get an accurate count, right? All right, first, Zechariah 13, verse 6, which in the King James Version says, quote, "And one shall say unto him, What are these wounds in thine hands? Then he shall answer, Those with which I was wounded in the house of my friends." This is an extremely popular passage among Christian apologists, although it's not cited anywhere in the New Testament in reference to Jesus. But apologists love it, including Josh McDowell, who in his The New Evidence That Demands a Verdict has Zechariah 13:6 as a prophecy of Jesus being, quote, wounded and bruised. Not only do many see it as a prophecy of Jesus' crucifixion wounds, many also see it as predicting Jesus being betrayed by a friend. One apologetic website includes Zechariah 13:6 among its, quote, 10 proofs that Jesus Christ is the Messiah. A lot of apologists present the passage as part of a what are the odds approach to Messianic prophecy. How many men in history have been betrayed by a friend and wounded in the hands? That sort of thing. Here's the problem. The passage is about a false prophet. Let's look at it in context. Zechariah 13, 1-6. In that day a fountain will be opened for the house of David and for the inhabitants of Jerusalem for sin and for impurity. And it will come about in that day, declares Yahweh, that I will cut off the names of the idols from the land, and I will also remove the prophets and the unclean spirits from the land. And will come about that if anyone still prophesies, then his father and mother who gave birth to him will say, You shall not live, for you have spoken falsely in the name of Yahweh. And his father and mother who gave birth to him will pierce him through when he prophesies. And will come about in that day that the prophets each will be ashamed of his vision when he prophesies. In order to deceive, he will not put on a hairy robe, but he will say, I'm not a prophet, I'm a tiller of the ground, for a man sold me as a slave in my youth. And one will say to him, What are these wounds in your hands or between your arms? Then he will say, Those with which I was wounded in the house of my friends. Now, unless Christian apologists wish to say that Jesus was a deceptive, false prophet removed from the land by God, they can't claim Zechariah 13:6 as a messianic prophecy about Jesus' crucifixion. Why would Christian apologists misuse a passage like this? It's worth noting that no less a Christian luminary than John Calvin said that Zechariah 13:6 is not about Jesus. In part 31 of his commentaries on the prophet Zechariah, Calvin wrote, quote, "Some apply this," that is Zechariah 13:6, "to Christ, because Zechariah has mentioned wounds on the hands. But this is very puerile, for it is quite evident that he speaks here of false teachers, who had for a time falsely pretended God's name." Second, Psalm 22, verse 16, which says, using the New American Standard Translation here, quote, "For dogs have surrounded me, a band of evildoers has encompassed me. They pierced my hands and my feet." It seems safe to say that after Isaiah 53, which I addressed in part 2 of this series, linked to the right of the screen for those interested, Psalm 22 in general, and Psalm 22 verse 16 in particular, is regarded as an apologetic brass ring. Even though it's never cited by any New Testament writer in reference to Jesus, not even the author of Matthew, who, as we've seen, was willing to declare just about anything a fulfillment of prophecy, Christian apologists want this passage, Psalm 22 verse 16, and they put up quite a fight for it. Why a fight? Well, let's look at it in the Jewish Publication Society's translation of the Tanakh, or Hebrew Scriptures. Quote, "Dogs surround me, a pack of evil ones closes in on me. Like lions, they maul my hands and feet." Putting this alongside the NASB translation reveals the issue. Like lions, they maul my hands and feet, versus they pierced my hands and feet. Of course, the latter sounds a lot like a reference to the crucified Jesus, but like lions, they maul my hands and feet, not so much. So what's going on here? Well, to put it in the light most favorable to Christian apologists, Psalm 22:16 is an extremely controversial and uncertain passage. To be sure, that's what some used to call a left-handed compliment, but it's the best, I think, that can be said for the Christian position. In the overwhelming majority of manuscripts that comprise the Hebrew Masoretic text, the official version of the Scriptures for Jews, Psalm 22:16 does not say, "They pierced my hands and my feet." It literally says, "Like a lion, my hands and feet." The Hebrew word is ka'ari, like a lion, which appears elsewhere in the Hebrew Scriptures. See, for example, Isaiah 38:13, quote, "I composed my soul until morning, like a lion, so he breaks all my bones." So the Hebrew translates to like a lion. The Septuagint uses a word that refers to digging or gouging, which translators have often rendered as pierced. Other Greek translations use words that refer to binding or disfiguring, and the Latin Vulgate uses a word that refers to binding, tying up, or surrounding. The variants are several, and it seems none is determinative. Now, in my opinion, among the things that militate most persuasively against pierced being the correct word is that, as I noted earlier, not one of the gospel writers, indeed none of the New Testament writers, cites Psalm 22 verse 16 in reference to Jesus' crucifixion. Let's face it, they didn't set the prophetic selection bar all that high. For example, the author of John claimed that a psalm about a foolish sinner found fulfillment in Jesus. The author of Matthew was willing to rip passages from their context, change their wording, attribute prophecies to prophets who never said them, and even just make stuff up. But all of them passed on Psalm 22:16. I'll pick this up in part 4.